What happens when a legendary icon refuses to play nice with a talk show host's agenda? You won't believe what unfolds when decades of Hollywood experience collides with primetime television politics in the most explosive confrontation late night TV has ever witnessed. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of music's most fearless voices decides she's had enough of being pushed around on live television. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live started like any other taping, but what transpired between the host and his guest Cher has sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. The tension was palpable from the moment the cameras started rolling, and what began as a routine celebrity interview quickly spiraled into a heated confrontation that ended with one of entertainment's biggest legends storming off the set in front of a live studio audience. The trouble started during what should have been standard pre-show preparations. Sources backstage reported that Cher had arrived at the studio with specific expectations about the interview topics, having been assured by producers that the conversation would focus on her latest projects and upcoming tour dates. However, just minutes before taping began, Kimmel apparently decided to pivot the entire direction of the interview without consulting his guest or her representatives. She walked into that studio expecting one thing and was blindsided by something completely different, revealed a production assistant who witnessed the pre-show tensions. You could see her face change when she realized what was happening. This wasn't just a miscommunication. It felt deliberate. The atmosphere in Studio 6A was already charged as the show's familiar theme music played, and Kimmel delivered his opening monologue with his typical sardonic wit. But seasoned audience members later described sensing an unusual undercurrent of tension that seemed to permeate the entire soundstage. When Kimmel finally introduced Cher with his characteristic flourish, the superstar emerged from backstage with a smile that industry insiders recognized as her professional mask. Polite, but guarded. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Cher," Kimmel announced, his voice carrying its usual enthusiasm. But those who knew him well could detect something different in his demeanor. As Cher took her seat across from the host's desk, the customary small talk felt forced and mechanical. The veteran performer's responses were cordial but measured, her legendary quick wit notably absent as she seemed to be calculating every word. "You look fantastic as always," Kimmel offered, leaning back in his chair with what appeared to be genuine admiration. "How do you do it? Seriously, what's the secret?" Cher's response was diplomatic but cool. "Thank you, Jimmy. I try to take care of myself and stay active. It's not really a secret, just good genes and hard work." The exchange might have seemed normal to casual viewers, but entertainment industry veterans watching from home immediately picked up on the subtle signs of brewing conflict. Cher's body language was notably different from her usual animated presence during interviews. Her hands remained folded in her lap, her posture straight, but defensive, and her famous smile never quite reached her eyes. As the interview progressed through its initial segments, Kimmel's questions began to take on an increasingly probing tone. What started as inquiries about Cher's career achievements gradually shifted toward more personal territory, touching on her past relationships and family dynamics. Each question seemed designed to push boundaries, testing how far he could go, before his guest would push back. "So tell me about your son Chaz," Kimmel said, his tone casual but his eyes sharp with anticipation. "That transition must have been quite a journey for your family." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cher's expression hardened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure. "Chaz is doing wonderfully, and I'm proud of him. But I'm here to talk about my music and my tour, Jimmy. That's what we agreed on." The host's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. But our audience is curious about your personal life too. You've been so open about it in the past." "When I choose to be open about it," Cher replied, her voice taking on a slight edge that made several audience members shift uncomfortably in their seats. There's a difference between choosing to share and being ambushed. The word ambushed seemed to electrify the studio atmosphere. Kimmel's expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something that looked almost like satisfaction at having provoked a reaction. But he quickly recovered, maintaining his television persona while internally calculating his next move. Ambushed? Come on, Cher. We're just having a conversation here. Isn't that what talk shows are for? The legendary performer's eyes flashed with something that audience members would later describe as a mixture of anger and disappointment. A conversation involves two people who respect each other's boundaries, Jimmy. This feels more like an interrogation. The tension in the studio was now unmistakable. Camera operators adjusted their positions, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The audience, initially confused by the shift in tone, began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. A real confrontation between two entertainment industry powerhouses playing out in real time on live television. But this was just the beginning. What happened next would leave everyone in that studio, and millions of viewers at home, completely stunned by the explosive confrontation that was about to erupt. Kimmel leaned forward in his chair, his media-trained smile growing wider as he sensed his guests' rising discomfort. What should have been a moment for him to back down and redirect the conversation instead became the catalyst for an even more aggressive approach. The seasoned talk show host had built his career on pushing celebrities out of their comfort zones, but tonight he was about to discover that some legends refused to be pushed. "Look, Cher, I think you're being a little sensitive here," Kimmel said, his tone dripping with condescension that made several audience members audibly gasp. "I mean, you've been in this business for what, 60 years? Surely you can handle a few personal questions." The dismissive comment about her age and the implication that she couldn't handle basic interview questions hit Cher like a slap across the face. Her legendary composure, built through decades of navigating Hollywood's treacherous waters, began to crack. The woman who had survived everything from abusive relationships to career sabotage was not about to let a late-night host diminish her experience and resilience. "Sensitive?" Cher's voice rose slightly, causing the studio's sound engineer to quickly adjust levels. "Jimmy, I've been dealing with men like you my entire career. Men who think they can steamroll over women because they have a microphone and a platform." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Kimmel's facade of casual indifference began to slip as he realized his guest was not going to back down or play along with his agenda. The audience, now fully aware they were witnessing something extraordinary, sat in stunned silence as two entertainment titans faced off. "Men like me?" Kimmel's voice took on a defensive edge, though he tried to maintain his television persona. "What's that supposed to mean exactly?" Cher shifted in her chair, her posture straightening as decades of fighting for respect in a male-dominated industry came flooding back. "It means men who think they can ambush women, push boundaries without consent, and then act like the victim when they get called out on it." The studio atmosphere became electric with tension. Camera operators zoomed in closer, recognizing they were capturing television history in the making. Behind the scenes, producers frantically debated whether to cut to commercial, but the raw authenticity of the moment was too compelling to interrupt. Kimmel's mask finally began to slip completely. "Oh, come on. Don't make this about gender. You're being ridiculous. This is how interviews work. If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't be doing press tours." The suggestion that she couldn't handle basic media obligations was the final insult that pushed Cher past her breaking point. Her eyes blazed with an intensity that reminded everyone why she had survived and thrived in one of the world's most brutal industries for over half a century. "Ridiculous?" Cher's voice now carried the full weight of her fury. "You want to know what's ridiculous, Jimmy? What's ridiculous is a host who thinks he can disrespect his guests and then gaslight them when they object. What's ridiculous is agreeing to talk about my music and having you try to turn it into some cheap therapy session for your ratings." The word gaslight seemed to strike Kimmel like a physical blow. His carefully constructed television personality completely dissolved, replaced by something uglier and more authentic. Gaslight? Are you serious right now? I'm doing my job as an interviewer. If you can't handle basic questions about your public life, that's your problem, not mine. Members of the studio audience began to murmur among themselves, clearly uncomfortable, with the hostility emanating from the host's desk. What had started as entertainment was now feeling more like witnessing a personal attack being broadcast to millions of homes across America. Cher stood up slightly in her chair, her legendary stage presence now fully engaged in combat mode. Basic questions? Jimmy, you ambushed me with topics we never discussed, ignored the boundaries my team clearly established, and now you're trying to make me look unreasonable for objecting. That's not journalism. That's exploitation. The accuracy of her assessment seemed to inflame Kimmel even further. Exploitation? Oh, that's rich coming from someone who's made a career out of oversharing every detail of her personal life. You can't pick and choose when you want privacy, Cher. The personal attack on her character and career choices was the moment when any pretense of professional courtesy completely evaporated. Cher's voice dropped to a dangerously quiet level that somehow carried more menace than shouting. How dare you? How dare you sit there and judge my choices when you've built your entire career on mocking and belittling people who trust you enough to sit in that chair? Kimmel's response revealed just how far he was willing to go to maintain control of the situation. Trust? You're getting paid to be here, Cher. This isn't a favor. It's a business transaction. And part of that transaction is answering the questions I ask, not the ones you want to answer. The reduction of their interaction to a mere financial exchange seemed to be the final straw for the legendary performer. Her hands gripped the arms of her chair as she prepared for what everyone in the studio could sense was about to be a point of no return. But what happened next would prove that even Kimmel had underestimated just how explosive this confrontation was about to become. Cher rose from her chair with the fluid grace of a performer who had commanded stages for decades, but her movements carried an unmistakable threat that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. The legendary entertainer's eyes locked onto Kimmel's with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through his carefully constructed television persona. A business transaction? Cher's voice carried a deadly calm that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. Jimmy, let me tell you something about business. In real business, you honor your agreements. You respect your partners. You don't lie to people and then try to humiliate them on national television. Kimmel, perhaps sensing he had pushed too far but unable to back down without losing face, doubled down on his aggressive approach. Humiliate? I'm asking legitimate questions about your public life. If you're embarrassed by your own choices, that's not my fault. The suggestion that she should be embarrassed by her life choices was like throwing gasoline on an already raging fire. Cher's composure, maintained through decades of industry abuse and personal struggles, finally shattered completely. Embarrassed? You think I'm embarrassed by my life? I've survived things that would have destroyed weaker people. I've fought for every success I've achieved while men like you sat in comfortable chairs, judging women who actually take risks. The studio audience was now completely silent, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Camera operators continued filming, but several looked visibly uncomfortable with the level of hostility they were capturing. Kimmel's response revealed just how deep his need for control ran. Risks? Come on, Cher. You've been coasting on nostalgia for decades. When was the last time you actually did something relevant? The personal attack on her current relevance was a devastating blow that seemed to hit Cher in a place she rarely let anyone see. For a moment, her legendary confidence wavered, and the vulnerability of an aging performer in an industry that worships youth flickered across her face. But instead of retreating, that moment of vulnerability transformed into something far more dangerous, righteous fury. Relevant? Cher's voice rose to a level that made the studio's acoustic panels seem inadequate. "I've been relevant longer than you've been alive, Jimmy. I was breaking barriers and changing the industry while you were still figuring out how to hold a microphone. And I'll still be relevant when your 15 minutes are up." The prediction about his own career longevity seemed to strike Kimmel at his most vulnerable point. His own insecurities about lasting power in an industry known for quickly discarding its stars. His mask of professional composure completely disintegrated, replaced by something ugly and personal. 15 minutes? I've been hosting this show for over 20 years. I think I know a thing or two about staying relevant. Unlike some people who need to reinvent themselves every decade just to stay in the news. The jab about her career reinventions was designed to wound, and it found its mark. But instead of backing down, Cher leaned forward with the predatory focus of someone who had found their opponent's weakness. Reinvention is called growth, Jimmy. Something you might want to try instead of hiding behind the same tired formula of attacking your guests when your jokes don't land. You know what's really sad? You had a chance to have a real conversation with someone who's actually lived an extraordinary life, and instead, you chose to be a bully. The word bully seemed to hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face flushed red as he struggled to maintain some semblance of control over the situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his ability to manage. Bully? That's rich coming from someone who's throwing a tantrum because she didn't get to control the entire interview. This is my show, Cher. My studio. My rules. If you don't like it, you know where the door is. The threat was unmistakable. Comply or leave. It was the kind of ultimatum that had probably worked for Kimmel countless times with other guests who needed the exposure more than they needed their dignity. But he had catastrophically misjudged his opponent. Cher stood up fully now, her full height and presence filling the space between them with an energy that seemed to crackle with electricity. Your show? Your rules? Jimmy, let me tell you something about rules. The only rule that matters is respect, and you've shown tonight that you don't understand the first thing about it. The studio audience was now completely transfixed, watching two entertainment giants engage in a battle of wills that had transcended typical television drama. This wasn't scripted conflict designed for ratings. This was raw, authentic confrontation between two powerful personalities who had reached an absolute impasse. Kimmel made one final attempt to regain control, but his desperation was now visible to everyone. Respect? You want respect? Then act like a professional instead of a diva who can't handle a few tough questions. The word diva was the final insult that pushed Cher past any possibility of reconciliation. Her eyes blazed with decades of accumulated frustration at being dismissed, minimized, and reduced to stereotypes by men who couldn't comprehend her complexity or achievements. Professional. Cher's voice now carried the full weight of her fury and disappointment. A professional doesn't ambush their guests. A professional doesn't break agreements. A professional doesn't try to humiliate people for entertainment. You want to see what a real professional looks like? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and everyone in the studio sensed that whatever came next would be the climactic moment of this unprecedented confrontation. But what Cher did next would shock everyone and create a moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media. Without breaking eye contact with Kimmel, Cher reached up and removed her earpiece with deliberate precision, the small device making an audible click as she placed it on the arm of her chair. The gesture was simple but unmistakably final. She was cutting off all communication with the production team and taking complete control of the moment. "This is what a professional looks like, Jimmy," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect from audiences worldwide for over 5 decades. A professional knows when to walk away from toxic situations and people who don't deserve their time or energy. Kimmel's face went pale as he realized what was happening. In all his years of hosting, he had never had a guest simply disconnect from the show while still sitting in the chair. The power dynamic he thought he controlled was now completely reversed, and the panic in his eyes was visible to everyone watching. "Cher, come on, let's just—" he started, but she cut him off with a raised hand that commanded immediate silence. "No, Jimmy, we're done here. You had your chance to have a real conversation, and you chose to be cruel instead. That says everything about who you are as a person and as a professional." Her words carried the weight of absolute finality, and the studio audience could sense they were witnessing the end of something significant. She stood up fully now, her legendary stage presence filling the entire space with an energy that made even the camera operators instinctively step back. "You know what the difference is between us. I've spent my entire career lifting people up, giving them music and performances that make their lives better. You've built yours on tearing people down." The comparison was devastating in its simplicity and accuracy. Kimmel tried to recover, attempting to inject some humor into the moment to deflect from the truth of her words. "Oh, come on, Cher. Don't be so dramatic. We're just having a conversation here." But his attempt at minimizing the situation only made things worse. Cher's expression hardened as she recognized the classic tactic of someone trying to gaslight their way out of accountability. "Dramatic? Jimmy, there's nothing dramatic about standing up for yourself when someone treats you with disrespect. That's called having self-worth." The studio audience began to murmur among themselves, and several people could be heard whispering, "Good for her," and "She's right." The crowd was clearly on Cher's side, which only added to Kimmel's visible discomfort as he realized how badly he had miscalculated the situation. Cher began to move toward the edge of the interview area, her movements graceful but determined. "You want to know what's really sad about this whole thing? I came here tonight excited to share my music with people who might need to hear it. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who thinks entertainment means making people uncomfortable." Kimmel made one last desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Cher, you're overreacting. This is just how interviews work. If you can't handle the heat—" "Don't you dare," she interrupted, spinning around to face him one final time. "Don't you dare try to turn this around on me. I've been handling heat since before you were born. The difference is, I've learned to recognize the difference between legitimate challenge and petty cruelty." The force of her words seemed to physically push Kimmel back in his chair. He was now completely out of his depth, facing a woman who had survived decades in an industry that had tried to destroy her multiple times, and his usual tactics were not only failing but making him look worse with every attempt. "I've worked with the best hosts in the business," Cher continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her experience. "Carson, Letterman, Oprah, people who knew how to challenge their guests while still treating them with basic human dignity. You could learn something from them." The comparison to legendary hosts was particularly cutting because it highlighted exactly what Kimmel lacked: the ability to create compelling television without resorting to cruelty. His face was now visibly flushed with embarrassment and anger as he struggled to find any way to salvage the situation. Cher picked up her purse from beside the chair and adjusted her jacket with the practiced ease of someone who had made countless entrances and exits on stages around the world. "I'm going to do something your producers probably never thought I'd do. I'm going to save you from yourself." The unexpected offer of mercy seemed to confuse Kimmel, who had been bracing for one final devastating attack. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm going to walk out of here with my dignity intact, and I'm going to let you figure out how to explain to your audience why you drove away one of your guests." She paused at the edge of the set, looking back at him with something that might have been pity. "But here's some free advice. You might want to think about why you felt the need to attack someone who came here to promote music that brings joy to people's lives." With that, Cher began walking toward the studio exit, her heels clicking on the polished floor with a rhythm that sounded almost musical. The audience spontaneously began to applaud, starting with a few scattered claps that quickly grew into sustained applause mixed with cheers of support. As she reached the studio doors, Cher turned back one final time and addressed the audience, directly, completely bypassing Kimmel. Thank you for being here tonight. Keep supporting artists who create things that make your lives better. And remember, you never have to accept being treated poorly by anyone, no matter how big their platform is. The applause grew even louder as she pushed through the studio doors and disappeared into the corridor beyond, leaving behind a stunned silence punctuated only by the sound of her departure. Kimmel sat at his desk, visibly shaken and clearly unsure how to proceed with the show. The incident immediately exploded across social media, with clips of the confrontation going viral within hours. Respect Cher began trending worldwide as millions of viewers praised her for standing up to what they saw as bullying behavior. The backlash against Kimmel was swift and brutal, with many calling for him to apologize and others questioning whether he should continue hosting. The show's ratings plummeted in the following weeks as sponsors began to distance themselves from the controversy. Cher, meanwhile, saw a massive surge in streaming numbers and ticket sales as public support for her stance grew stronger each day. She had turned what could have been a career-damaging moment into a powerful statement about dignity and self-respect that resonated with millions of people who had felt bullied or dismissed in their own lives. The confrontation became a defining moment that reminded everyone why Cher had remained relevant for over 5 decades, not just because of her talent, but because of her unwavering refusal to be diminished by anyone.